The next morning was already off to a stressful start. I had an important meeting at the office, one that could make or break a huge contract for the company. But it also meant I'd have to miss the appointment I'd scheduled with Sophie to go over the interior design concepts for our new home. I felt torn. This house meant so much to both Mark and me, and I wanted to make sure every decision was perfect, but I didn't have a choice. I needed to prioritize the meeting, and that left only one option. "Mark, could you step in for me today?" I asked him that morning. "It's just to review the plans with Sophie. It won't take long." He looked at me like I'd just suggested he run a marathon. "I don't have time for this," he snapped, his tone sharp. "This isn't the priority right now." I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my patience. "Mark, this is our house. You can't leave everything up to me. Just this once, please." His expression was tight, but after a moment, he sighed heavily and nodded. "Fine," he muttered, his tone making it clear this wasn't his idea of a good use of his time. I knew he wasn't happy about it, but I told myself it would be fine. Mark was capable, and Sophie was easy to work with. They'd get through the plans, and everything would move forward. At least that's what I thought. By the time Sophie arrived at the house, I was rushing to get out the door. She pulled up in her small, tidy car and stepped out, balancing a large folder under one arm. Her dark hair was pulled into a sleek bun, and she wore a crisp white blouse that gave her the air of effortless professionalism. "Sophie," I called out, waving as I met her on the driveway. "Thank you for coming by today." She smiled warmly as we walked toward the front door. "Of course, Clara. I'm excited to show you the updated plans." As we stepped inside, I called out, "Mark, come here for a second. I want you to meet Sophie." Mark appeared in the doorway, mug in hand, his expression neutral but polite. "Hi," he said, his tone clipped but not unkind. He was wearing a simple button-up and jeans, his hair still slightly damp from his shower. Sophie extended her hand, all business. "It's nice to meet you, Mark. I've been working with Clara on the interior design plans for your new house." Mark shook her hand briefly, nodding. "Good to meet you," he said, though his attention seemed half elsewhere. I could tell he wasn't exactly excited about diving into fabric swatches and lighting fixtures. I stepped in quickly, trying to ease the tension. "Sophie's been fantastic," I said, smiling at her. "She's got a great eye for detail, and I think you'll really like what she's done so far." "Well, I'll leave you two to it," I added, glancing at my watch. "I've got to head out for my meeting." "Wait," Mark said, turning to me. "You're not staying?" I shook my head, grabbing my bag. "I don't have time, but it's fine. Sophie will walk you through everything. Just make sure you tell her what you think, okay?" Mark looked like he wanted to argue, but he pressed his lips into a thin line and nodded instead. "Great," I said, relieved. "Thanks, Mark. I'll check in later." As I walked out the door, I glanced back to see Sophie spreading her plans across the dining table while Mark stood there, arms crossed, watching her with that skeptical look he always got when he felt out of his depth. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, looking back, I wonder if I should have stayed just a little longer.
But then, as soon Clara left, something shifted. I wasn't sure when it happened, but it did. The coldness that had hung between us melted, even if just slightly. I could feel his gaze on me when I moved to show him the next design on my tablet. It was subtle at first, a flicker of attention I hadn't noticed before. But as I explained the design concept for the living room, I felt his eyes lingering a bit too long on my face, my hands. I tried not to let it bother me, tried to focus on the work, but his presence had an effect on me that I couldn't ignore. I wasn't supposed to be thinking about him this way. He was Clara's husband, and yet I couldn't help but feel drawn to him. His voice, when he finally spoke, had softened. "This one's different," he said, his eyes still trained on me, but this time not with irritation. No, something else was there. Something warm, almost inviting. It should have made me uncomfortable, but instead I found myself leaning in a little closer, as though his attention was magnetic, pulling me in despite my better judgment. I was caught up in my imagination, fantasying about the strong lines of his jaw, the way his fingers moved, casual but deliberate. I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like if the atmosphere between us shifted again. What if I leaned in just a little closer? I shook the thought away quickly, focusing on the task at hand. But the tension was thickening with every passing moment. Every time I moved, I felt him watching me. Every time I spoke, I felt the weight of his attention on my words, on my lips, but I couldn't keep eye contact with him. "Can you go over that one again?" His voice was low now, more intimate, and I found myself obeying before my brain could even register what was happening. I didn't want to be drawn into whatever was going on between us, but it was already happening. As I moved closer to the table, trying to reorient the design for him, I felt him shift. It was a subtle movement, but I knew he was no longer sitting in a stiff, irritated pose. His body language had changed, becoming more relaxed, more open. And then, without warning, I felt his hand brush against mine as he reached for the same design on the table. My breath caught, and I froze, unsure of how to respond. For a brief moment, our fingers touched, the heat of his skin sending a jolt of awareness through me. He didn't pull away, but I did pull away and was resistant. The air between us felt different now, charged. The lines between professional and personal were blurring, and I was caught in the middle, torn between pushing him away and wanting more. I pulled my hand back, but I felt his gaze on me, felt the unspoken words hanging between us. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something that I didn't know how to handle. Couldn't ignore Mark's presence behind me, his warmth pressing close enough to send a shiver through me. Every second felt stretched, almost suspended. He'd been polite, professional even, but now there was an intensity about him, a pull that unsettled me, and no matter how hard I tried to focus, it was getting harder to ignore. I kept talking through the design, pointing at the plans, trying to control my voice, though it faltered. My eyes shifted to him, and I caught the way he was watching me, a gaze that lingered as though he were taking in every inch of me. It was subtle, but each glance brought a quiet weight to the room, a tension neither of us was admitting. My fingers traced the tablet screen, but his presence grew impossible to ignore. There was a magnetism that drew me in, something stirring that left me feeling exposed, vulnerable. And against my better judgment, a small spark of excitement simmered under the surface, growing stronger with every glance, every unspoken moment between us. I knew I shouldn't feel this way. He was Clara's husband, off limits in every way. But his gaze didn't waver, and each time our eyes met, a dangerous curiosity flickered in me, a longing that I couldn't quite place but couldn't deny either. Then he stepped closer, his voice low and steady, but with a hint of something else, caught my breath. I think you know what I want. The words hung in the air, weighted with a meaning I could no longer ignore. My heart quickened, my pulse racing, and though I should have told him to stop, to leave, the words wouldn't come. I turned to face him, the tension unbearable now. His hand rose gently, cradling my chin, lifting my gaze to meet his. The rush of heat swept through me, and my body betrayed me. I wanted him. I didn't want to, but the ache inside me was undeniable now, too intense to ignore. "Mark," I whispered, barely able to find my voice. He didn't wait. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine, tentative at first, but electric. The gentleness sending a thrill down my spine. I responded instinctively, my hands drifting to his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath my fingers as the kiss deepened, the tension unraveling into something raw, unrestrained. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer, and the heat between us grew, filling the room. I didn't know when it had started, but now, in this quiet, dim room, everything inside me was pushing me toward him. I couldn't stop, not now, not when every part of me craved this. Breathless, I broke the kiss. I couldn't look into his eyes, still feeling that battle between desire and guilt raging inside me. But he pulled me close, his lips finding mine again, more urgent this time, pressing me back against the table as he kissed me deeply, his hunger matching my own. It was all too much, too fast, too deep, too overwhelming. When we finally pulled back, we stood there panting, my hand trailing down his arm as his rested at the small of my back, keeping me close. I felt his body pressed against mine, leaving no room for doubt about what he wanted. "We can't do this here," I whispered, my mind racing with how far we'd already crossed the line. Mark nodded, his breath still heavy as he slid his hands to my hips. "Then let's go somewhere more private." I glanced toward the door, my mind spinning, and suggested, almost on impulse, that we move to the rocking chair in the corner. That chair reminded me of something deeply personal, a memory of my grandmother, a place of comfort and safety from childhood. Somehow I wanted to share that feeling, to bridge the past with this wild, forbidden present. Mark's expression softened, understanding. We moved toward the chair, a piece of my past mingling with this impossible present, and as I settled into its familiar embrace, I felt a strange calm, allowing myself to sink into the moment with him, letting go, even as I knew everything was about to change. Our lips met in a passionate kiss, our bodies pressed together as we stumbled towards the rocking chair. Mark's hands explored my curves, his touch setting my skin on fire. I could feel his hard length pressing against me, and I longed to feel him inside me. With a devilish grin, Mark lowered himself into the rocking chair, pulling me onto his lap. I straddled him, our lips never parting as I ground my hips against his. I could feel his cock twitching in anticipation, and I reveled in the power I held over him. Breaking our kiss, I slowly made my way down his body, peppering kisses along his chest and abs. I could feel his breathing grow ragged as I reached the waistband of his pants, my fingers deftly unbuttoning and unzipping them, as I freed his penis. From its confines, I couldn't help but marvel at its size and girth. I wrapped my hand around his shaft, giving it a gentle tug, as I looked up at him through hooded eyes. I purred, my lips curling into a smirk. Mark could only nod, his breath hitching as I leaned in to take him into my mouth. I swirled my tongue around his tip, tasting the salty tang of his pre-cum. With each stroke, I took him deeper into my throat, my fingers playing with his balls as I sucked him with abandon. Mark's hands tangled in my hair, guiding my movements as he thrust his hips upward, fucking my mouth with a final desperate thrust. Mark's penis twitched, and a hot, white jet of cum filled my mouth. I swallowed eagerly, savoring the taste of his release. As Mark's breathing slowed, I climbed back into his lap, nuzzling against his chest as we rocked gently in the fading afternoon light. Our lovemaking in the rocking chair was just the beginning of our marathon sex session. Mark scooped me up in his arms, carrying me to the bedroom with a primal hunger that I couldn't resist. He laid me down on the bed, his body hovering over mine as he claimed my lips once more. His hands roamed my body, teasing my nipples to hard peaks before sliding lower, tracing the curves of my hips and thighs. I could feel my own desire building, my pussy growing wet with anticipation. Mark's fingers found my entrance, sliding easily into my slick folds. I moaned, my hips bucking as he explored my depths, his thumbs circling my vulva in slow, deliberate strokes. "You're so wet, Sophie," he murmured, his voice husky with desire. "I can't wait to be inside you." I whimpered, my body begging for more as he removed his fingers, replacing them with the head of his penis. He teased my entrance, rubbing it up and down my slit, coating himself in my juices. With a growl, he thrust forward, filling me completely. I cried out, my back arching as he began to move within me, our bodies finding a rhythm that was both familiar and exhilarating. Mark's thrusts grew harder, deeper, each one sending waves of pleasure crashing through me. I wrapped my legs around his waist, pulling him closer, urging him to take me higher. "Yes, Mark, just like that," I moaned, my nails digging into his shoulders as I felt my orgasm building. "Don't stop." Mark's only response was a low, guttural growl as he drove into me, our bodies slapping together in a symphony of desire. I could feel myself teetering on the edge, the tension coiling deep within me. And then with a final earth-shattering thrust, I fell. My orgasm tore through me like a tidal wave, my pussy clenching around Mark's penis as he continued to bleep me through the waves of pleasure. Mark's own release followed close behind, his penis twitching as he filled me with his seed. We lay there, panting and spent, our bodies still tangled together as our heart rate slowly returned to normal. As our passion subsided, Mark rolled onto his side, pulling me close and pressing a tender kiss to my forehead. I was still caught in between my feelings and professional ethics, different waves of emotions and reactions I felt towards Mark. I sighed, hoping it turns out well.